Today, we're going to talk about a psychological state that many people experience, but rarely fully understand. A state that appears quietly, almost invisibly, when the day ends and the world finally goes silent. We're going to explore the psychology of people who overthink at night. Why the mind becomes louder in the dark, why thoughts turn inward, and why, for some people, nighttime is not a place of rest, but a place of intense inner activity. This is not a conversation about weakness or bad habits. It's a conversation about the nervous system, emotional history, identity, and the hidden psychological mechanisms that shape how a person relates to themselves when no one is watching. At night, the mind enters a different psychological territory. The external world finally loosens its grip, social roles dissolve, expectations fall silent, and what remains is the raw inner landscape a person rarely has time to face during the day. For people who overthink at night, this moment is not peaceful. It is charged. The mind becomes vivid, associative, unfiltered. Thoughts that stayed dormant all day rise to the surface with unusual intensity, not because they suddenly appeared, but because there is finally no noise strong enough to suppress them. From a psychological standpoint, nighttime overthinking is not a failure of self-control. It is the activation of the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for memory, identity, self-evaluation, and emotional meaning-making. When external demands disappear, the brain turns inward and begins reviewing unresolved material. For individuals with heightened sensitivity, anxiety, or a history of emotional inconsistency, this internal review does not remain neutral. It becomes intrusive, repetitive, and emotionally loaded. Very often, this pattern is rooted in early life experiences where emotional safety was uncertain. When a child grows up in an environment where moods shift unpredictably, where approval must be earned, or where emotional expression is discouraged, the nervous system adapts by staying alert. Thinking ahead becomes a form of protection. Anticipating outcomes, replaying interactions, and imagining future scenarios are ways the mind tries to prevent rejection, conflict, or loss of control. Over time, this vigilance becomes automatic. At night, when there is nothing left to monitor externally, the mind turns that vigilance inward. This is why nighttime thinking rarely feels random. It follows familiar themes. Relationships are replayed. Conversations are mentally rewritten. Social moments are examined for mistakes. Decisions are questioned long after they are irreversible. The mind searches for evidence of failure, inadequacy, or social error, not because the person enjoys self-criticism, but because the psyche is trying to answer a deeper question. Am I safe as I am? When the answer was uncertain in the past, the mind keeps asking. At night, many people don't just think. They begin to fantasize. They imagine different versions of their life, alternative paths, ideal friendships, conversations that never happened, a version of themselves who is more confident, more admired, more successful, more understood. This imagined life often feels emotionally richer than reality, not because reality is inherently empty, but because fantasy offers control. In imagination, rejection doesn't occur unless allowed. Belonging is guaranteed. Identity is coherent. The person is finally seen the way they wish they were seen. Psychologically, these fantasies are not escapism in a shallow sense. They are compensatory narratives. When real-life emotional needs, connection, validation, significance are unmet or inconsistently met, the mind mind creates internal scenarios to temporarily regulate emotional pain. At night, when defenses are lowered, these inner worlds become more vivid. The person may lie in bed replaying imagined friendships, imagined success, imagined conversations where they are valued and understood. This is not delusion. It is an attempt at emotional completion. However, fantasy often has a shadow side. As soon as the imagined life fades, self-judgment rushes in. The same mind that created an ideal version of the self begins to compare it with reality. This is when thoughts like, "I'm not like others," "I'm falling behind," "something is wrong with me," or "I'm a failure" appear. Before sleep, the inner critic becomes especially persuasive. Without external reality checks, its voice feels absolute. These thoughts are rarely about objective failure. They are about identity insecurity. Many nighttime overthinkers are not unsuccessful, incapable, or broken. They are individuals who learn to measure their worth internally while constantly scanning for external approval. At night, when the day's achievements no longer distract, the mind evaluates the self globally, not "what did I do today?" but "who am I really?" For someone whose sense of worth is fragile, this question feels dangerous. Biologically, the night amplifies this experience. Cortisol levels drop, emotional regulation weakens, and the brain becomes more reactive to memory and meaning. A minor regret becomes a defining flaw. A single awkward interaction becomes proof of unworthiness. The mind loses proportionality. Thoughts feel heavier, not because they are truer, but because emotional filters are offline. What makes this cycle particularly painful is that overthinking feels purposeful. The person believes that by analyzing enough, they will arrive at clarity or self-improvement. But psychologically, repetitive nighttime thinking is rarely productive. It is circular. The brain is not solving problems. It is seeking emotional safety. Overthinking is the mind's way of staying awake to protect the self from imagined future pain. Sleep, in this context, feels unsafe. Letting go feels irresponsible. Rest feels like abandonment of vigilance. The inner critic thrives in this state. It speaks in the language of realism and discipline, but its function is prevention. It believes that if it points out every flaw in advance, rejection can be avoided. At night, when the person is most vulnerable, this voice dominates. It reframes fatigue as laziness, sensitivity as weakness, and uncertainty as failure. The person does not argue back because the voice feels internal, authoritative, and familiar. Importantly, nighttime overthinking is often a sign of unexpressed emotion. Feelings that were not acknowledged during the day do not disappear. They transform into thoughts. Anger becomes rumination. Sadness becomes self-criticism. Longing becomes fantasy. The person may not even feel emotional in a traditional sense. Instead, they feel mentally restless, trapped in narratives that won't resolve. Distractions may help temporarily, but they do not address the core issue. This is not boredom. It is unfinished emotional processing. Silence brings up what was postponed. The mind is not asking for more thinking. It is asking for permission to feel without judgment. For many overthinkers, this is unfamiliar territory. They learn early that feelings were inconvenient, unsafe, or irrelevant. Thinking replaced feeling as a survival strategy. Ultimately, people who overthink at night are not weak-minded. They are often deeply perceptive, conscientious, and emotionally complex. Their minds learn to work overtime because rest was never fully safe. The goal is not to silence the thoughts aggressively, but to understand why they exist. When the nervous system learns that feelings can be tolerated, that uncertainty is survivable, and that worth is not constantly on trial, the mind slowly releases its grip. Night is not when the mind betrays you. It is when it tells the truth without filters. And for many people, those thoughts are not trying to destroy sleep or peace. They are trying to make sense of a self that learned too early to stay awake in order to survive. Sometimes the mind does not need answers before sleep. It needs reassurance that it no longer has to stand guard. Thank you very much for watching. If this topic resonated with you or helped you understand yourself a little better, feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in psychology, inner processes, and deeper self-understanding. And if you have ideas or questions for future videos, write them in the comments as well. We'll explore them together.